Today on the CEO Barbecue, we're doing something different, but still, it's kind of the same. I'm still in Vancouver and still doing a couple of tours, visiting a couple of people at their offices, and today I'm going to be talking to Precipitate Gold. It's been a while since I last spoke to Jeff, I think maybe even the end of 2024. So I think he's going to have a lot to say. I'll just grab the elevator and I'll go see him in a few. For a bullet point summary of this and all other CEO interviews, please go to resourcetalks.com and subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. The company you're about to hear from has paid us for the production of this interview, but this interview is still intended only for experienced speculators because this is venture capital and mining is a very risky industry where failure is the norm. All conversations are general and impersonal in nature, and they contain forward-looking statements. I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and my business sells content-producing services, which also makes me biased. So before continuing on, please talk to an independent investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital is at risk, and also visit setterplus.ca where you'll find the company's official filings. If you're not 100% sure you understand all the biases and the disclaimers that I just showed you, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said herein. That all said, all right, so this is supposed to it's right there. And there's a couple of companies on the registry of this office. That seems to kind of be the case. I think they're splitting costs. I'll ask about that though. Let's see. Should be here. There he is. How's it going, Jeff? Good. Thanks so much for having us. Yeah, good to see you as well. Let me put on a mic on you just before we can start the tour. I see a couple of names though on the registry here. So you're sharing this space, it's not just you?
We do. We share the space. We've been lucky enough to share space with a few of my colleagues from prior companies that I was involved in. And so there's 3 or 4 companies here, and so it helps to mitigate costs and expenses and
that's right.
Keep everything efficient as it relates to our office space.
What does that cost? Like, what's an office like that go you for?
We have 2 offices in here. I think we spend about $1,200 an office, so it's a couple $1,000s a month for us to have an office space with, as we'll see here, there's kitchen, there's boardroom, there's reception, so pretty cost effective for sure.
Is it worth it though, or why do you even have to have an office in downtown Vancouver?
Yeah, I mean, we're living in a world now where you can spend a lot of time working at home, and I do sort of offset some time here with working at home as well, cut down on the commute. But I think, especially in a market like we're having now where things are a little bit more bullish and there's a bit more activity, I think it's important to be down in the city where you can run into people, you can interact with people within the industry. The mining space in Vancouver is all within a relatively small space in downtown Vancouver, so being in it, I think, allows you to have a little bit more time to run into people and have those kinds of networking type conversations. So whether it's a coffee or a lunch, I think it's good to be in the city.
Yeah, Vancouver is interesting that way. Like Toronto is not like this at all. Because you just walk outside and people, like even in McDonald's the other day, they were talking about there's a bit of a market top signal, but there was a young guy talking about AI and mineral exploration and stuff like that.
Right.
So it happens.
No, for sure, and definitely Vancouver. It's spread out a little bit, but traditionally when I started out in the sector here, more than 20 years ago, it was maybe maybe a 3 or 4 block radius where sort of every junior mining company, you could look at the in the lobby at the list of who was in what suites, and the entire building would be junior mining companies. So all in a small space. It's got bigger. We've branched out a little bit, but still sort of being in the action here downtown I think is important.
Yeah. Let's. Do you want to show me around?
Sure. Yep. There's not
a lot to show.
There's nobody here today.
Okay.
But we sometimes have someone here at reception. Like I said, we share office with a couple of other companies. So this is one of the offices of one of the other companies.
Is that a female office? Got a lot of plan.
It is. Yes. It's far better decorated than you'll see that mine is. So yeah, you can tell it's got a female touch. We got a little bit of storage space here. This is my geologist Michael Moore's office. So Michael and I have a very thin wall in between us, so we can sometimes yell at each other and communicate.
Not too often, I hope.
Without getting up off of our chairs and communicate that way. But Mike's in the field right now, down in the Dominican Republic. He'll be back in a couple of weeks. But so that's where he sits.
So he gets to enjoy the nice weather, and you get to sit and look at a brick wall. Amazing.
Look at a brick wall. That's right. Yeah. So this is my office, small space, but it's everything I need. It's got a desk, and it's got a computer and a couple of screens, and it doesn't take much these days to be able to do business just about anywhere. So this is my space, and then we've got access to a boardroom here.
This is a shared boardroom then, and then you book it or whatever when you need it?
Correct, yep.
Okay.
And then we've got a kitchen here and a couple of other office spaces down the hall that are operated by some of the other companies that we share with. But it's a relatively small space. We've been in this building actually quite some time, downsized in and around COVID time. And again, it's sort of one of these things where some people are in every day, some people are in, intermittently. So it's a quiet space, and I always get access to the boardroom whenever I need it.
Well, do you want to sit down and have a chat about Precipitate? What are you guys here up to?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's sit here. So yeah, I just really want to talk to you, Jeff, about what you did last year and what you're going to do this year. That's kind of going to be the gist of it all. Let's start with last year. What did you, if we were having the same conversation here last year, you might be a lot less happier given your share price performance last year.
Yes.
But what did you set out to do last year? What would you have told me I'm going to do X in 2025, and what of that did you actually complete?
Yeah. 2025 was an interesting year for us in that we had capital. So unlike perhaps a lot of other of our peers, we had a significant amount of money in the treasury that came through a deal that we did with Barrick a couple of years ago, where we had a cash injection. But understanding the circumstances of both the market as well as our particular projects and particular jurisdiction, we were sort of cautious and cagey with the money. And so what I mean by that is we were electing to do programs to keep moving the projects forward. We didn't want to be stagnant, but at the same time, we felt as if we were in an environment, and this is somewhat specific to the Dominican Republic at the time, where we were sort of monitoring the return on investment if we were to do big expenditures. And so we were doing things on the ground, on the projects, that were, not particularly capital intensive, but we knew would move targets forward. So we were doing geochemistry, boots on the ground, sampling, mapping, testing new zones, looking to identify new zones within the project. Some of those came together very nicely. Sort of in the middle of last year, we announced some new geochemical anomalies that were sort of delineated through just that boots on the ground kind of work. As a follow-up to that, to sort of take those to the next level or better refine those, we did geophysical surveying through sort of the second half of 2025, and we did ground IP, induced polarization over about 4 or 5 different target areas within the project where we knew we had geochem anomalies. We wanted to know, do we see the right kinds of geophysical signatures tied in with that geochem? And the last of that was actually just reported in early 2026. So that was the work that we did at the end of 2025, and that started to set the stage for our Juan and Pueblo project, which is our flagship, really kind of maturing to a point where there were a number of what I would consider to be drill-ready targets, where we did that work during a time when it didn't make sense for us to be drilling because our neighbor was having some permitting issues and some community issues, and we really felt that the return on investment for us to go and spend millions of dollars really wasn't there at that time. We saw sort of a light at the end of the tunnel with that as things were progressing, and so we thought, look, let's just hunker down, get our targets ready, and when the environment shifts, we'll be in a position to be able to execute.
Mm-hmm. You also did some work on Pueblo Grande, I think, last year, and the news came in early this year. That's not a project you've talked about a lot, I don't think, before. What's happening there? Yeah,
I mean, that was a project that was part of an earn-in agreement with Barrick. And so Barrick, from 2020 to 2025, spent about $7.2 million US there in an exploration earn-in. So they had a right to earn 70%. They did a significant amount of work. It was very targeted and very focused on certain zones within the project. And I think that they were, sort of looking for something. They had a very specific model in mind that they were looking for. So after $7.2 million US in 5 years, they gave the project back to us. They terminated the earn-in. And through most of 2025, or that was early in 2025, so through the balance of the year, we were busy with other things, but we knew we wanted to go back and sort of revisit that data, look at all of the work that Barrick had done, understand it first and foremost, but also to be able to start to delineate or identify where there's some areas here that were maybe overlooked or underappreciated, and was there still something there. I'm a big proponent that, if something's not there, move on. And so I didn't really want to make a lot of noise about the fact that, we still think there might be something that maybe Barrick has missed. But we wanted to make sure that we did the work and the data review so that we could give ourselves some comfort as to whether there was in fact maybe something there or not. So getting to your question, the point, it was sort of late last year when we started to see some geophysical data from Barrick that there were some indications that there was perhaps something happening down a couple hundred meters that it appeared that they had not really given much attention to. So that was interesting. Quietly, we sort of thought, okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Let's go back and do some further follow-up investigation. So we ran our own geophysical survey over that area where we thought we saw a chargeability anomaly in Barrick's data, with a specific view to test that specific area. It did in fact return, quite a significant chargeability anomaly, a really strong charge, and at depths, reasonable depths, 100 meters down to about 350, and 400 meters by 800 meters. So a big sizable target. That in and of itself is very interesting. What we really had to do from there is say, okay, has this already been tested? So one of the other things that we did is we modeled that, and we included within that model all of the prior drilling that had been done both by Barrick and other prior operators to see, sure, there might be an anomaly here, but has it been drilled? And in which case, maybe it's not as prospective as we think. However, there's not a single drill trace that runs through this anomaly. So it's an interesting target. It's an interesting anomaly. At present, it's just a geophysical anomaly. It's got the right geology at surface, but it's just a geophysical anomaly. So these things can break your heart. But we think it's sizable enough and significant enough that we think it warrants a drill testing to find out what it's all about.
Thesis right now is that it might be hiding a high sulfidation system?
Correct. That's right.
How would Barrick miss that, though? Or why would they even walk away before testing it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know, and I guess the jury's still out as to whether or not, upon, in the last week or two when we announced this new anomaly, whether Barrick sees that news release from Precipitate and says, yeah, we saw that and we didn't think much of it, and therefore we didn't test it, or Barrick says, we didn't really recognize that, so I don't know which it is. I don't know whether or not Barrick saw it. It was in their data to some extent, but it hadn't really been fleshed out properly with the right kinds of geophysical follow-up. So again, I don't know what Barrick's view on it is and why they didn't test it or didn't recognize it.
Why did Barrick walk away from the whole thing in the first place, though? I mean, they spent quite a lot of money on it, and now they're kind of dropping what's going on there.
Yeah. So, I mean, anytime you get into an earning agreement with a major, you know that the threshold is quite high. What they're looking for is, and certainly in Barrick's situation, they're looking for what they consider tier 1 assets. So these are world-class assets. It was clear to us that they had a very, very specific focus and sort of looking for mineralization that would fall into sort of the Pueblo Viejo model. And of course, this project, Pueblo Grande, is adjacent to their world-class Pueblo Viejo mine. So I think they were looking for mineralization in the same context as what they already had at Pueblo Viejo. I can't speak to, again, the decision to walk away. They did some exploration, they did some drilling. It was fairly focused within a couple of key areas of an otherwise fairly large land package. So it seemed to me that they really did have sort of a specific agenda in terms of what they wanted to go and test and what they were looking for. They didn't find anything of any real consequence, and I will admit that all the results that we got back from Barrick were relatively inconsequential and insignificant. So it's not like they hit some big booming intercept and then decided to walk away. And so, like I said, that's where my knee-jerk response to that is the big boys have looked at it, they've walked away. Let's not try to make something out of it that's not there. It's finished. But it was the data review that we did that delineated this one particular item that we think is worth a follow-up. And like I say, we may do the work. It should be relatively inexpensive drilling to test this target. When we do that, it may be that Barrick was right, but I certainly wouldn't want to walk away without testing this kind of a target adequately and properly. And the fact that Barrick didn't test it, like I say, I don't know whether or not they thought it was inconsequential or they just didn't see it. But I'm not prepared to walk away from this project without testing that. And if we have some joy, we're onto something that's situated adjacent to one of the largest gold mines in the world. If it's not there, we've got a second project at Juan and Pueblo, which is really our flagship anyway, that we would quickly focus our efforts on a number of other drill ready targets.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that as well. I want to better understand how you're going to be spending money in 2026. Just going back to 2025 again, though, for a second, is all the work that you did, is that all announced to the market? Do you have any assays or anything else coming in terms of geophysics or anything else? No,
for the most part, we're fully disclosed in terms of the work that we did in 2025. We do have some sample results that we are, some samples that we took several years ago on a really broad project-wide sampling program. We took 17,000 soil samples from throughout the property. We ran XRF scanning on a lot of those. There were soil samples, a lot of those samples, and so we prioritized those samples at that time. What we consider to be the priorities of that have been submitted to the lab, and that's what helped delineate some of these new zones over the course of the last 12 or 18 months. There are additional samples that I would sort of consider sort of secondary based on the hierarchy that we gave them in the initial onset, that we are contemplating, taking a further look at those, getting those into the lab and see if any of these other areas come along. So that would be the only thing that might be sort of a geochem sort of work that may be able to come out. But the primary focus at this point is, we've done the geochem, we've done the geophysics on, 4 or 5 target areas within the project that we think now, like as I said, have matured to a point now where the next thing, really logical thing to do is drill.
Mm-hmm. And again, we will talk about that drilling, but I'm also looking at your share price here, which went to a low of, I think, 6 cents, maybe 6.5, 7 cents. Mm-hmm. And now it's got up to a high of 50 recently. What's causing that run? Is that market beta helping you out, or what's going on? Yeah, certainly there's a rising tide effect going on. I don't question that at all. I think we've seen that throughout the space. There's been a lot of sort of positive movement in a lot of the equities. But I think specific to us, if I look at where that catalyst started in terms of when we started to turn the corner and start to see share price appreciation, it was late last year, the beginning of this year. So on December 29th, we announced a proposed private placement of $6.5 million Canadian. Within the context of that news release, it was indicated that the lead order on that financing was coming from Dominican business interest and Dominican investors and Dominican institutions. And so on January 9th, we closed that financing, relatively short between announcing it and closing it. The funds are all in, and I think the market has started to respond favorably to that. I think because there's a bit of a precedent in terms of what these investors have done with some of our peers in country, specifically a company called Gold Quest Mining, where these investors came in at as low as 16 cents a share and have put in several rounds of financing, and that stock is now $2.40. So I think that the market started to see, obviously the analog of what these investors have done with another junior mining company, and started to speculate that, okay, this is going to be the start of a run for Precipitate. So it's largely based just on the financing getting closed, which is important on 2 levels. Number one, we've got an adequate treasury now where we've got about $9 million in the bank. But equally important, I think, and perhaps even more important than the money, was where that money was coming from and who these investors are and what they represent. And so what we've got here is a collection of investors who are, of course, significantly wealthy, but also very, very well connected in the country, politically and with communities and all the stakeholders. And so I think that what we've seen with our neighbor Gold Quest and the injection of capital from these investors is a bit more of a clarity of path, a little bit more expeditious with respect to permitting and community relations and that kind of thing. So again, that's really been a bit of a barrier for several of us operating in the Dominican Republic over the last several years, is just bureaucracy and the slowness of pace of kind of moving things forward. And I think with these investors, there's a belief that things are going to start to move a little bit more quickly, and that we can deploy that capital into more meaningful things like drilling. Mm-hmm. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage, the fact that they're local to the story? Because what would the difference be if we just raised money here we're close to House Street? So what if you just raise it with people here in Vancouver? Yeah, I think there's a big difference. I mean, what's significant about for me is that these investors are not traditionally mining and or junior mining investors. So there's a whole world, and I'm not discrediting this by any means, but there's a whole world of sort of junior resource investors who their business is to just deploy and put money in, take money out, transact, finder's fees, warrants, that kind of thing, and just sort of moving money around within the natural resource space. And that's great. That kind of stuff is incredibly helpful to our business. But these individuals are people who are much more generalists. They're more business entrepreneurs, and so mining isn't the only thing they know. And so the fact that they've identified mining, precious metals, and specifically mining within their own country as an opportunity, says to me that they really see something here that has real long-term growth potential. It's not a trade. And so that, I think, is an indication that not only is there mining opportunity within the country, but also that the government wants to promote this and support this, because again, these are the kinds of people who would have lines of communication to important decision makers in government. And so I think it's telling all of us that these individuals, these investors, see a real opportunity not only in metals but in their own country, and that this jurisdiction is going to sort of promote and support mining going forward. And because we're one of a very few number of companies that is exploring or advancing projects there, there's only so many places for those kinds of investors to put their money. Would you still do the financing at the same price? I mean, hindsight is 2020, and if I gave you a magic stick, you could go back. Would you still bring the same people in at the same price?
Yeah, great question. Because even at the time, the financing was done at a fairly sizable discount, you know, it's in my nature to try to do what's best for the company and to try to squeeze and try to get better terms. I think in the end, the decision was that, you know, the benefits far outweighed anything that would come from, you know, maybe perceived negativity out of a discount. And I knew that ultimately we wanted to have these people in as shareholders. So we were able to adjust the terms a little bit, whereby we, you know, instead of a full warrant, we got a half warrant. Instead of a 2-year warrant, we did an 18-month warrant. And I was also able to get these investors to agree to a 6-month hold period rather than the standard 4 months, just to, you know, indicate to the market that they had a long-term view. So at the end of the day, I feel as if the difference of a couple of pennies at that time really wasn't worth jeopardizing the transaction, and it was more important to get these guys on board. And I think, you know, the proof's in the pudding. Anybody who would have maybe been disappointed or upset with the discount on the unit price and, oh, you know, the dilution of that, has now seen their investment go from 11 cents to 50, as you said. So I think everybody's feeling a little bit comfortable and happy with how it's turned out.
I understand you have, how much money do you have right now? I know it should be a couple of million, but yeah.
About $9 million.
Okay.
So we had 3+ when we did the financing. So that puts us at a fairly comfortable $9 million cash position.
So it doesn't sound like you're going to need more money, but all of us can use a little bit more money. Would you use the share price performance now and kind of top up the treasury, maybe set it for a couple of years to come, or are you not looking to raise capital in 2026?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, you know, as a junior mining CEO, you're sort of always cognizant of, you know, the black swan event, and, you know, things can change, and you don't want to take anything for granted. So I think having access to capital is always something you're looking at and contemplating. I think, however, we're in a position here where we've got a comfortable enough cash position that we could do a very, very aggressive, and that was part of the rationale on the raise that we did at $6.5 million recently, to have the kind of capital to be able to envision and plot up, you know, a several, you know, 12-month sort of out kind of program of drilling, and rather than 5,000 meters and raise a bit more money and another 5,000, you know, we could set out to do 10, 15, maybe even 20,000 meters of drilling. So, and you know, combining that even with, you know, perhaps a more aggressive, you know, sort of marketing and promotion campaigns this year to coincide with the work that we're doing, you know, still the G&A and the overhead, we would have more than enough money to get through the next 12 or 18 months. So you're always cognizant of that, and from a dilutive standpoint, to be able to raise a little bit more money at 40 or 50 cents would be great. We do, however, have some warrants that are very much in the money right now from that last financing, and so I think we're in a position where we would be able to access additional capital in whichever means we decide to do.
How much money do you think might come in from those warrants?
It's about $4 million. So if they were all to be exercised, it would generate about another $4.5 million, something like that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
No accelerator or something like that on it?
No, we didn't. We explored that. The investors wanted to just sort of have the standard sort of 18-month term on it. So again, 18 months in our business is a pretty short fuse. 18 months goes by pretty quick. So we think we've got more than enough money to get us through that time period, but if there was an opportunity to get those accelerated, a justifiable reason. You know, these investors want to support the company. You know, they're talking about when we get to a resource stage or when we get to a development stage or these kinds of things. So I think their objective here is to be major shareholders, not just in a drill play, but in a project that can become a meaningful mineable deposit, and they want to finance that all the way through.
Yeah. What else is happening in the Dominican, or what happened in 2025? Did something major change? Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of touched on it a little bit. I think the biggest sort of the tip of the spear, if you will, for mining in the Dominican Republic over the last several years has been our next door neighbor on one of our projects, which is Gold Quest Mining and their Romero project. So that's a project that was discovered back in 2012. They have advanced that to a several million ounce resource, about 3.5 million ounces gold equivalent. And then we're stalled due to sort of bureaucracy and kind of government delays, and as much as, you know, I think there was a perception that the DR government was being difficult, I don't really think it was the government per se. you had sort of a mix of community issues and some locals that were opposed to mining and some NGO interests coming in. And so there was this pressure on the government that, mining is bad. And so the government, of course, in any country, one of their first objectives is to be popular and so they can get reelected. So, there was this sort of communication with the government and us within the sector that, look, we want mining, but we also don't want to be perceived to be doing something that the local people don't like. So you've got to sort of work with the communities and spend more time educating the communities so that if we give you your permits, we're the good guys, not the bad guys. And so there was a long delay there where, we were all sort of pulling on that same rope, trying to sort of get, the narrative sort of changed a little bit and, for people to understand what mining could do to some of these smaller remote communities. And I would say to your question about what's changed in the last couple of years is that the government, I think in part with the financing of these Dominican investors, the government has been a little bit more proactive on sort of giving the green light and the permission for Gold Quest specifically to move that project from the resource stage to a feasibility stage, environmental impacts, and marching that towards production. And so that, of course, creates a more positive light about the jurisdiction in the country. That's been net beneficial to us, and now we feel as if it's a time where good news can be responded accordingly versus good news 2 years ago from one of our projects would have fallen on deaf ears. So, so the government, I think, has been has all along has been supportive of mining, but has tried to do it in a very delicate way. And I think now they've managed to find ways to keep these things moving forward because they understand the importance of what mining can do for jobs and taxes and royalties and all those kinds of good things.
When is the next election?
It's in 2 years.
Okay, so plenty of time for stability and plenty of time for decent work to happen. What is that work? What exactly are you going to do in 2026?
Yeah, well, so for us, a big part of what we've been doing, again, over the last year or so has been sort of preparatory work for the eventuality that we'll be able to drill. And so, in terms of permitting, we've done a lot of work in ensuring that the permits that we already had are still in good standing. Any new zones that we've delineated over the course of the last 12 or 18 months are getting permitted. A lot of work with local communities. I mean, we've done a lot of work over the last 12 or 18 months with respect to, community liaisons, engaging with communities, small initiatives with local communities to make sure that they understand, that we're here to look after the best interests of everybody, not just ourselves. And that as a sidebar, that's kind of been helped by these Dominican investors as well, in that, there's this, there's the potential that there's this view within the Dominican Republic that we're a Canadian listed company, we're Canadian management, and we're coming down and we want permits and permission to be able to extract these resources for Canadian interests. Mm-hmm. And so to get a sizable stake of new shareholders who are Dominican, changes that narrative a little bit to whereby we are not just a bunch of Canadians coming in and trying to extract. We're working with local Dominican interests and people who pay taxes and generate other revenue for the economy in other ways. So, we've tried to sort of position ourselves to be a little bit more of a Dominican story than just a Canadian story that's coming in with foreign investments and heading out. So all of that stuff is kind of, we've been positioning ourselves to lay the groundwork for all of that, changing a little bit of the makeup of the company share structure, working with local communities, getting our permits ready. The latter half of 2025 was a lot of geophysics to kind of, again, refine and better delineate targets. And I would say over the course of the last few weeks, the last couple of pieces of news of that work have come out, kind of culminated with the financing. And now I think, probably the next 2 months or so, we'll be doing preparatory work to get ready for drilling.
Mm-hmm. I think Juan de Herrera is a large land package, right? So I think the things that you're telling me about so far, they're all great, and they won't be a challenge. But focus might be the challenge, or not. How do you focus in? How do you pick targets? What exactly do you want to drill?
Yeah, and there's no question we've got a lot of targets. There's sort of two ways to look at that. One is, if you want to win the lottery, it helps to buy more than one ticket. And so I think it's good to have a few different cards to play as you move your project forward. But again, focus becomes important. And I think that really ties in with this financing that we've done and the money that we have in the bank. I've reminded a few people, Gold Quest, as much of a success story as that is, with a 3.5-4 million ounce deposit moving towards production, they spent a lot of time exploring there, and it was hole number 90 that was the discovery hole. So it's not going. I'm prepared for the fact. Look, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst if you're running a company. And so we've got a number of targets. If the first target we drill delivers, great, we're onto something and we can continue on with delineation drilling. But we've got the financial capacity to have that first target that we decide and determine is the priority target, or maybe it's just logistics that means this is the one we can get to first. It doesn't work out after 3, 4, 5, whatever number of holes it is, then having the financial capacity to move on to the next one without having to go to the market and say, we kind of think we understand it better now than we did before, but we need more money. That's a tough road to hoe. So I think it's better for us to have the financial capacity to sequentially test these targets in whatever order we decide is best. But certainly we will have sequential sort of work that goes from one target to the next.
What is that order, or do you not have it yet?
I don't have it right now, and in fact my geologist, Vice President of Exploration, Michael Moore, is in the field right now setting foot on a lot of these target areas, and it's a combination of, first of all, what do we think that the mineral tenure could be here, or tenor could be there with respect to mineralization, strongest geophysical anomalies versus weaker geophysical anomalies, access, do we have to construct some sort of a dirt road, do we need to bulldoze some things, so all of that stuff kind of comes into play. But right now we're in the process of sort of boots on the ground, looking at these things. What's the topography? Is this going to be a challenging place to drill? Will we have to sort of drill it from this angle or that angle, and trying to lay out what's going to make the most sense? But I can say that each of these targets is distinct enough that a lack of success at one will not diminish the prospective nature of another. So I think until they're all drilled, there's still a reason to continue on. It's not as if it's a proof of concept where if this one doesn't work, then none of them will work. Mother Nature can be very challenging sometimes, and so it might have the right geochemical signature and geophysical signature, but maybe it's not mineralized. Or where within those signatures is the mineralization? Is it in the guts of it? Is it in the edges of it? So again, most of these targets have never been drilled. So I think it's important for us to relay to investors that these things are going to take a little figuring out, and that's where I go back to GoldQuest's discovery of hole 90. You need to sort of, first of all, you need a little bit of luck, but also you can better understand these things as you generate more data.
Wait, so Mike's enjoying 25, 30 degree weather and you're sitting in rainy Vancouver talking to me?
That's correct. I got the short end of the stick, yeah.
No, and it might be a good idea actually to sit down with Mike as well when he gets back from the field and talk about these targets, because I think there's a bit of a cover, so there's not a lot of geochem showing up on top.
That's
so
right.
But it is mostly, what is it, geophysics that you'll be relying on then in that case, IP?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
And that's really been and again, we also have the added advantage that our neighbor GoldQuest is more advanced in the progress of their project. They're now at a resource stage moving toward feasibility. What that's allowed us, really from day one, though, is to benefit from the work that they've done. And there's nothing better than knowing what you don't want to go after or what didn't work. And so to have that intel has saved us a fair bit of time and money as we've sort of targeted our zones. So yeah, we know that as it relates to GoldQuest and the discovery of Romero, and not as well, there's another project a little further up the road, a company called Unigold, similar sort of thing. Not a lot of outcrop, not a lot of surface exposures. You get some soil geochemistry that gives you some indicators of where you want to be, but geophysics has really been the tool. So if you can find these high chargeability anomalies that are situated proximal to or ideally situated right underneath some sort of a geochem anomaly at surface, that's where you want to be. Again, it's not as cut and dry and black and white as that. Do you want to be in the high chargeability, the moderate chargeability, the edges of it? There's lots of things to sort of figure out, and each of these anomalies is going to be distinct and unique in that way, so you really don't know until you drill them. But we've gained a lot of useful intelligence from our neighbors, and we've had a really good working relationship with GoldQuest all along, where geologists sort of share information and CEOs share information, and we recognize that the success of one will be to the benefit of both, and so how do we help each other succeed? And on top of that, or further to that, there's also certain areas within sort of the greater land package where interesting mineralization or interesting geophysical targets are situated virtually right up against the claim boundaries. And so there are some things on GoldQuest ground that appear to run onto ours, or ours that run onto theirs. And so again, being able to communicate with each other on understanding those things to determine whether or not there's some continuity onto our ground or their ground has all been very helpful to have that open dialogue with those guys.
When do you think drilling is going to start?
It again, this prioritization and sort of final ranking of where we want to go needs to be finished. But I think my hope is that we're drilling by the end of this quarter. So, I think we're probably a couple of months away from the commencement of a first phase of drilling. What happens after that, obviously, is going to largely be driven by, success. And if we, let's say we were to start, say, at Pueblo Grande, because that's an area that's permitted, fairly easy access, and we've kind of got a fairly well-defined target there. We could certainly start there relatively soon and then shift over back to Juan and Herrera. And then at Juan and Herrera, I would envision a fairly sustained program as we've touched on. There's a number of different targets, so I don't think we'd be in a position to sort of shut down drilling until all those targets have been tested. So, again, whether or not we stay at one because we've found something that justifies continuing on, or we move from one to the next because we don't see enough, I see, at minimum a 6 months worth of drilling here. Mm-hmm. The drills that we use are man-mobilized drills. They're relatively small. They get down to 500-meter depth, so they're very efficient. It's core drilling. They're very effective for us. But, the topography is a little tough, and so moving these things around from one drill pad to another takes some time. So I would expect the drill campaign to sort of run over the course of several months.
You have those rigs committed, though, and really where I'm coming from with this is that just walking the floor at Roundup and talking to some of the service providers, they're like, we're completely committed, and everything from drillers to camp to everything else. It seems like it's a bull market again, which we enjoy, but at the same time, it gets harder to get service providers. So yeah, do you have rigs committed?
We don't have contracts signed, but we have 2 drill contractors that we work with. We also own our own drill. It's a bit of a tricky story. So we co-own a drill with GoldQuest. So GoldQuest and Precipitate had an opportunity several years ago to acquire equipment out of bankruptcy that was already in the Dominican Republic. And the logic on that was sometimes importing things into the DR can be expensive and time consuming, and these drills were already there. We didn't want to see them leave the country. So we acquired those for $80,000 total. So it was $40,000 for us, $40,000 for GoldQuest. It was dirt cheap. We've used them on one occasion, and so we still have that. GoldQuest is very busy with multiple drills currently on their project. So they've engaged a couple of different drill contractors. We're speaking to those drill contractors, and so there's a number of different ways that we could do it. We could use our drill with those drill contractors and save costs because it's our equipment, or we just go ahead and use them on the basis of perhaps working together with GoldQuest in terms of upping the quantity of meters because we're sort of working together in the same region. So we've been talking about pricing with these 2 specific drill contractors, and I'm very comfortable and confident that we've got access to a drill. Both of them have said yes. We're just sort of deciding who we want to go with and who's going to give us the best service and the best rates.
How many rigs are you asking for?
Just one at present. So, I think we would start with one. I think sometimes you can't, because these targets are so early stage, I don't want to necessarily get too far ahead of ourselves by getting a bunch of holes drilled where you haven't had time to assess what comes out of the drills. And as you just touched on in terms of service providers, we're going to see the same thing with assay labs. And so what I don't really want to do is that we flood an assay lab with a bunch of holes and a bunch of data, and we don't have the results of that back, and then you're sort of drilling blind. I think it's good to be able to do some, in these early stages where you don't know a lot about what's going to come out of the ground. I think it's important to sort of, give yourself the opportunity to take a breath, get some assay information back, and then give yourself the better opportunity based on data to plot up where you drill next. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start with one, but again, depending on how things go, we do have the potential to be drilling on 2 different projects if they both work out, in which case, I could see that we maybe move to a couple of drills down the road, but for now we're going to start with one.
In terms of money split, Juan versus Pueblo, who gets what?
I think Pueblo Grande is fairly binary, and maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe there's room for there to be more, but I think it's fairly binary here in that there is a sizable geophysical target that needs to be tested, and I don't know what number of holes that will be at which point my team will feel as if we've exhausted it, but it's 3 to 6 or 7 holes, whatever that number is that we determined to do. Relatively short, shallow holes, maybe down to 450 meters, something like that. And we'll know. At the end of the day, this anomaly is intriguing, it's striking, it's very, very strong in terms of its chargeability, it's large, and it doesn't have a hole in it. So it needs to be tested. If that doesn't pan out, then that's potentially the end of Pueblo Grande, for us. There are other areas, but I would see that on the back of that, we would focus almost exclusively for the time being at Juan and Herrera. We've got some other property interests. We've got a project called Ponton, which is also drill ready and very interesting, but you know, the low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, is after Pueblo Grande would be to go to Juan and Herrera and really focus there. So I see, you know, I see an allocation of $750,000 to $1 million perhaps in a drill program at Pueblo Grande, and then the balance, you know, will be applied towards Juan and Herrera.
Why not use some of the land that you have to attract some new capital and or partners, like option it out or JV it, or is that within the strategy?
Yeah, interestingly enough, and I think it's because of these Dominican investors and the buoyancy in share prices of GoldQuest and Precipitate recently, I have had some inbound calls. Now, they're not necessarily from major mining companies, but other juniors or even new cos that are sort of starting up and saying, hey, this looks like an interesting emerging jurisdiction. You guys have been there a while. Do you have anything that you would option or joint venture out? Right now, I'm inclined to just hang on to what we have. We own all of our assets 100%. So we're not burdened by any underlying option payments or work commitment requirements, and the holding costs in the Dominican Republic are relatively minimal. So for now, I think, you know, because we've kind of weathered the storm and been there through some pretty challenging times, I feel as if we've got, you know, sort of the land package that's pretty optimal for us in terms of we've got the good stuff. I mean, we've been there long enough that if something really striking was available, we would have acquired it. So I think we've got some of the best ground in the country from an exploration standpoint. And for now, I think, you know, it behooves us to just hang on to that. And if the time emerges where we've got significant, you know, manpower or finances to be able to be, you know, working on 3 or 4 different fronts at the same time, great. But we're not in a position where we need to alleviate some of that stuff and put it in other hands. So we're just going to stick with what we've got.
I was hoping you'd say they're just too good to let go.
Well, there's that. Yeah, they are. Well, like I said, you know, we spent a lot of time during sort of the downtime of the jurisdiction and the sector where we were cashed up. You know, at one point we had $6-7 million in the bank thanks to a transaction with Barrick. And, you know, I said, okay, look, if we're not working, what can we be doing? How can we be adding value? How can we take advantage of this situation? So we did look at several other areas within the Dominican Republic as possible new acquisitions. But yeah, we feel as if what we've got is some of the best exploration targets within the country. And again, in areas where you can get things done. There's parts of the country that might have wonderful geology, but if you're too close to resort towns or, you know, protected areas and parks and things like that, doesn't make sense. So we like where we are from not just a geological standpoint, but also the ability to get things done.
What would you consider success from this program? If we're sitting here same time next year and we're talking about 2026 instead of 2025, what do you want to tell me in order to feel as if you've had success?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you know, at the end of the day, the focus for us and the objective for us is discovery. You know, for us to identify something new and to, yeah, deploy this capital into, first of all, just making a discovery, but secondly, you know, following that up with some additional, you know, delineation drilling that, you know, we start to identify something that could be put together as a resource. There's a number of different ways. I think for us, we're fortunate, and there's a number of different ways for us to things that we can do that would be considered successful. Number one, making a discovery, identifying a bona fide, you know, standalone mineral deposit that can be mined. I mean, that of course is the ultimate objective, several million ounce deposit. But we also have the added benefit that because of the proximity to GoldQuest and GoldQuest's existing resource and GoldQuest's own exploration targets combined with ours, there's sort of the potential here for a district sort of consolidation. You know, there's the possibility that somebody comes along and says, hey, GoldQuest, you've got 3, 4, 5, whatever it ends up being, million ounces. You know, gold price is what it is. You know, this thing's going to make a lot of money for a long time. But we want to own this, but we also want to own all the exploration upside as well. And so for us, we could be part of that kind of a scenario that even if we don't have a standalone multi-million ounce deposit, the pure sort of prospective nature of our land package could still be part of something like that could be accretive to us. And then of course there's the opportunity that, again, you know, major companies, as we've evidenced in the past with Barrick and Pueblo Grande, somebody may come in and want to either do some sort of a JV or an earn-in. But
is that still on the table?
Not. I mean, for us at this point, I think that we've always been more of a go-it-alone company. I mean, the situation that evolved with Barrick when they earned in on that project was was sort of market driven. I mean, it was a tough time in the market. 2018, 2019, things weren't that great. We knew that it was a big land package that was going to be fairly intensive in terms of capital to sort of identify where there might be something. Like I said, Barrick spent $7 million in 5 years and didn't find anything. So we sort of saw all of those circumstances and thought, you know what, let's offset this to the big boys and let them spend the money, because we always sort of believed that Juan and Pueblo was kind of our flagship. So I don't know, for success, I guess, ultimately it's about discovery. It's about finding something that can be either a standalone deposit, or if it's a smaller deposit, it can be something that can be part of a bigger picture consolidation with sort of the Romero and Gold Quest story. And then of course that's specific to Juan de Herrera. If we have some drill success at Pueblo Grande, I'm curious to see how that would play out, because of course we've had an arrangement with Barrick and they've walked away from it. Does Barrick come back if we find something, or do they just sort of say, you know what, we've got egg on our face and we'll just kind of look away and not go? I don't know how they would handle that.
I haven't seen that before, actually. Does that even happen?
Yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm saying I don't know what the precedent would be for giving something back and then deciding you're going to jump back into the fold after discovery success. So, I don't know whether that would happen. I do think that, again, if we found something meaningful enough, there's all kinds of infrastructure for someone else to put together a mine that would be just happen to be very, very close to Barrick. So again, I can't speculate on how that would all evolve. But yeah, I would like 2026, if we look back on it in 2027, I'd like it to be a year where we drilled, tens of thousands of meters. We tested a number of targets. Ideally, we've hit on at least one of those targets and are advancing that from a discovery to, delineating, either continuing to find the edges of this mineralized deposit, or starting to talk about what kind of resource we might be able to put on something like that. So yeah, definitely going to be a year that I think will be dictated by the drill bit for us.
I'm really trying to put you in a box here, but I want some numbers. What is like you dropped a couple of potential numbers, potentially a couple of million ounces. How big of a resource would matter? How big does this thing have to be in order for it to be buyable by someone who wants to mine it?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, that region of the Dominican Republic is fairly high grade. So, you could, again, all things being equal, depending on what the grade would be, something as modest as, 1 million plus ounces, I think would be attractive perhaps to a mid-tier producer, again, in these metal price environments. But ultimately, I think our objective is to try to find something that is either a multi-million ounce deposit that's going to attract, a significant major company to come in and want to acquire, or, and again, I don't know what the number threshold would be here, or to be part of, somebody seeing that this district is going to go from the 3 million ounces that is currently Romero and going to be 5 or 7 or 10 when you pull together all these exploration targets. And oftentimes, I've been lucky enough a few times in my career where, mid-tier major companies have bought out companies I've been involved with. And when they pay, the understanding typically is the major comes in, they pay a premium to market, and everybody goes away happy as shareholders. Well, why do majors pay premiums? Because they believe they're going to ultimately add enough value that premium becomes a discount. And so the idea would be, sure, we'll buy Gold Quest and Precipitate for X because there's 3 million ounces here, or 4. But we know that when all is said and done and we look back on this transaction, we're going to have 4 million, 5 million, 7 million ounces, and this will look like a dirt cheap scenario. So ultimately, I think for us, evidencing that this district has upside potential, whether it's 1 million ounces here or 1 million ounces there, or just really prospective targets in those areas, I think will continue to draw attention from mid-tier major companies into this district. So I guess all that to say, there's a few different ways to sort of skin the cat on this, and I think it's be dictated by the work that we do and the results that we generate, and in terms of how we navigate that to try to ultimately create an exit strategy that's good for all shareholders.
You mentioned that you're really looking to kill targets. That's what exploration really is about. What is that internal threshold in terms of grade or width for you to walk away? Like if you see 20 meters of 2 grams, do you walk away, or what's that grade threshold? Yeah,
again, it's all dependent a little bit on the time. I wouldn't say that I could sort of put that down in sort of black and white terms in terms of what makes it, what doesn't. We've seen a little bit of drill success in the past on our project. So with relatively good widths and grades, the trick becomes, can you duplicate that over a reasonable strike? Or, like, again, you can find these things, but if you can't sort of duplicate that and get some consistency and have some cohesion where these things hang together, then, a single splashy drill intercept is relatively inconsequential. So it's what we look for with respect to the targets that we're delineating is not just, look, we've got some areas that are quite high grade in terms of the surface work that we've done and some rock samples. Our CN zone, for example, within the Wandahura project, we have a rock grab sample that ran, 73 grams per ton gold. It's the highest grade rock sample anywhere in the district. But we've done some trenching there. It comes together, and so we've got good widths, good grades. But, what's the area here with respect to the amount of space of the right kind of volcanic rocks? And so, again, making sure that, sure, we can go drill there, but, does it have the spatial area to be able to host, can we put together ounces? So really what it comes down to is, do we think that we can identify something that would be a mineable deposit? So I can't get into specific, grades and widths, but, what we've seen in the past in this region is relatively high grade, combined with some pretty sizable widths. So we think that if we find enough of this, we can put together a meaningful deposit.
You're not going to let me put you in a box here. I understood that part. If I Jeff, if I had a blank check and I told you, write whatever number you think is enough to get me a resource on this thing that is potentially buyable by someone, what number would you write? How much money do you have to spend?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one too in terms of being put in a box, because I've often been a guy that as an exploration, all my career has been sort of in the junior exploration side of things and the discovery side of things. There's an argument to be made that sometimes resources are not particularly the best thing to do. You want to have a resource, of course, at some point in time, but using the example, and I know it's an exception, but the example of Great Bear. I mean, Great Bear continued to drill. They spent tens of millions of dollars, but they never put together a resource. What they wanted to evidence is that this thing exists, that it's real, that it's big, and that it continues to be open. And so for me, I think, I don't know that I would want to pigeonhole a deposit too soon with a resource. If we're having drill success, continuing to step out, continuing to not find the edges of something, I would be happy to continue to do that, sort of expansion drilling versus, resource drilling and the density of that. But at a certain point in time, oftentimes you do find the edges of these things, and there are two schools of thought. One would be, okay, we've delineated a sizable mineralized body here. We don't know whether it's 1 million ounces or 10 million ounces based on, we don't have an economic study on it. But do we want to stop and spend, several months and several $100,000 to put together a resource on that? Or would we be better off to pick the drills up and go over to this zone and see if we can do the same thing over there? And, smart mining people, major company vice presidents of exploration and business development are able to look at drill data and tell themselves approximately how many ounces. They don't necessarily need us to put edges on it and tell them exactly what it is. So, my view here is that, maybe getting a little bit more to your point, I envision that we could spend somewhere in the ballpark of about $5 million in exploration and drilling this year. That will test a number of targets. Again, what happens after that will be dictated by results. And if we feel as if we've got the tiger by the tail on a particular zone and we want to hone in on that and focus on that, and that becomes the story, great, then that's where we'll continue to put additional capital. Or it could be that, we're sort of bouncing from one to another and trying to sort of, figure some things out. So, but we've in our minds, we've sort of allocated, and that goes back to, again, the financing that we did. Why did we do that quantum? Where is that money going to go rather than just stick it in a bank account? We had a vision that, we could envision something in the ballpark of a $5 million campaign for this next 12 to sort of 14 months. So whether or not we have a resource, or whether or not we decide to put together a resource, whether we have a discovery or don't, I don't know. But I think that's a number that I can sort of say I think we're sort of focusing towards.
It seems like there's going to be a lot more activity 2026 than what there was in 2025, or maybe 2024, I think, is when you and I first started talking.
That's
maybe.
correct. Yep.
Are you going to go out to the market more and talk to the market more? Do you want to do more marketing? How much money are you looking to spend on marketing?
Yeah, I've always been a guy that, my background is investor relations. I've always sort of really had an affinity for that, but I've always also been the kind of person that always, I want to pick my spots. I don't want to just, be out blabbing about something nonstop, and people just sort of tune you out if there's nothing to sort of back that up with respect to deliverables and results and that sort of thing. So my objective has always been to be a little bit more promotional, or to tell the story more at the right time, when you feel as if when you've told somebody about it and they start to watch it, because chances are people aren't going to buy it just because you talked about it, but they may put it on their screen, they may watch it, they may look to see what you do over the course of the next month or two, what news releases unfold. And so we're at a point now where I feel very strongly that this is something that people should be watching, that I do feel as if we're going to have meaningful news going forward, and anytime you advance towards drill programs and future assay results, that's the potential for a major catalyst and a sort of a value proposition change. So, and I know that there's a lot of competition out there. You and I bumped into each other at VRIC and Metal Investor Forum. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of companies. A lot of those companies have cashed up over the course of the last 6 or 8 months. And so I think there will be a lot of work being done and a lot of news being generated. So how do you stay ahead of the curve, or top of mind for people? And that's by getting out and telling your story. So there will be an increased budget for sort of investor relations and marketing and communications, for sure. Very targeted, however. I mean, there's a lot of ways to blow money on things that don't actually provide a return on investment, in my opinion, as it relates to that side of the business. Nothing's perfect, and sometimes you've got to try some things to figure out what works and where you want to be. But that, combined with a stronger, more consistent presence at conferences. I've typically done conferences over the last several years, just attending myself and sort of walking around and having a copy of my deck in my pocket and being able to sort of speak to people. I could see us being more commonly being participants now in some of these things, including not only here in North America but also in Europe as well. So definitely looking to increase the profile of the company, and certainly that budget will be impacted as we spend a little bit more time and money on the road.
What percentage of the money do you think is going to go into the ground versus running the corporate and telling the story?
It's probably, as I envision it in my head, it's probably somewhere in the ballpark of about, maybe 10%, something like that. Okay. Again, that number could be increased. I guess I'm fortunate in that, I come out of that background, and so I feel as if there's a lot of that stuff that I can kind of do a little bit more organically, rather than, no disrespect to sort of a geo running company, but where they just sort of have to just sort of hand that off and let someone else kind of manage it. It's something that I have some experience with, and so I'm able to sort of mitigate costs a little bit that way by having my own relationships with people and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think somewhere in that ballpark. And again, like the drilling, these things are dynamic, and as things are working, or there's more, let's say the exponential news is delivered, maybe that IR budget or promotional budget increases to 20%, or maybe it pulls back a little bit if things are quiet for a bit, that kind of thing. So it's dynamic, but I definitely think that we've got to have an eye toward that, and otherwise we just get lost in the mix of all the other companies that are out there making noise.
Well, what about the new investors that you brought in on the last financing? In that case, what are they telling you about how you spend your money? Do they want you to work toward a resource? Do they want to see more marketing? What's kind of feedback they're giving you? Yeah,
interestingly, on the marketing front, they again, I think this speaks to sort of the type of investors they are. Long-term, very, very fundamental, and let's go find a deposit that can become a mine. Not particularly interested in a news release for a news release sake, and what's the point, and let's keep it to material stuff. Whereas I'm communicating with them a little bit to say, we need to keep the market abreast of what we're doing. So we'll find a happy medium there between their view of like just go and do the work and the market will take care of itself kind of thing, versus me saying, well, we need to kind of keep people informed. In terms of their objectives and their goals, they want us to make discoveries. They want to turn that Juan and Herrera project into a integral component of the greater Torreo district, which is where GoldQuest is located and we're located, and to be a meaningful part of that district. And so, their objective is for us to find something there. These are guys who are not lifelong gold people, but they've sort of cottoned on to the fact that there is a incredible bull market happening right now, and they didn't cotton on to it because gold's $5,000. I mean, this was 2 years ago sort of thing. They sort of saw what was coming, and they saw the political environment within their own country and decided they wanted to get invested in that. So yeah, their objective is to find meaningful deposits that can be mined. And to that extent, as it relates to their involvement with GoldQuest, they've talked about, if there's a capital cost on the back end of a feasibility study for GoldQuest, that's in the several $100 million range to build a mine. These guys they have an eye on potentially facilitating that. So rather than going the old-fashioned route with a bunch of debt and equity and how does this all come together. So when I hear that, that tells me what they're interested in is building mines, and this is not a quick stock trade for them. It's, hey, Jeff, Precipitate, go find deposits that can be part of a mine, and we want to be the people that help put those mines into production. Mm-hmm. That's the objective. Now, if in the wonderful world where somebody else comes along and has incredibly deep pockets and wants to pay a premium and they want to build it, well, I'm more than happy to listen to those conversations, as are my Dominican shareholders as well.
I was just reminded of something that I should have followed up on before, but when we talked about G&A marketing, do you think you might need more people? Do you need to hire geos or anybody else, fieldies or whatever?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And we have been doing that actually. So we had, like I said, before this financing, we had $3 million in the bank. And so we were already in a position where we had the financial capacity to start to move things forward. If this financing didn't happen, we were still going to go ahead with testing. We'd have to be a little bit more selective maybe about our drilling, but we were going to drill one or more of these targets regardless. And so we started to staff up a little bit, mostly in the field, in the DR side of things. We've brought on a couple of new geologists in the last several months. One of those we've news released. Actually, we added to our technical team with a guy named James Thom, and James is formerly at Banyan Gold. He was a big part of that sort of discovery process for them, up to, I think, 7 million ounces or something like that. James had worked for us in the Dominican Republic prior to going to Banyan. Really loved the country, really loved his time there. Maybe, as you touch on, sort of slightly nicer weather. There was an opportunity to bring him back as Banyan sort of rolled into more of a sort of a development story. And so we've brought him on, and we news released that a few months ago. We've added another Latin American geologist to the team. So yeah, in terms of here in Vancouver, we're still fairly lean. There's basically myself, my vice president of exploration. We've got a CFO that's kind of outsourced and sort of on a partial time, and a corporate secretary, the same thing. And that we can sort of manage the corporate side here in Canada relatively efficiently that way. But yeah, more people in the Dominican Republic is something we've been working on. And again, as the work progresses, and if the drilling goes well, yeah, maybe you do get into, to do some modeling or some other sort of data review that requires, additional sets of eyes. But I think we've built up a team that we're very comfortable with now to be able to manage the kind of work that we plan to do over the next few months. But yeah, and also hiring locals. I mean, a big part of what we do to ensure that, it's just the right thing to do, but also to ensure that we're sort of kind of giving back to the communities we work in is, if we need to get equipment, we don't use helicopters and big trucks. And for the most part, we get up from the nearby towns to these drill target areas on the backs of animals and ox and mules and things like that. So we go into the local community. If we need 7 guys, we hire 15 guys, and we make sure that we're creating some jobs for some people. If they've got animals, we rent, we pay them for the use of their animals to get the gear up. And if people go to our website, there's some photographs and videos and things like that of that stuff, sort of people in motion. And again, trying to make sure that what we do is to the benefit of everybody that we impact. And so we've been hiring a lot of those kinds of people as well.
Talking about the locals makes me think about a larger topic here, which is the risks. What do you think are the main risks for Precipitate in 2026?
Yeah, I think, there's been a real turning in the corner, so to speak, with respect to the Dominican Republic over the last year, where I think the jurisdiction has become, people are more comfortable with the jurisdiction, it's become more favorable. Good things have happened in terms of permitting and licenses for both GoldQuest and myself, or for Precipitate, but I would say that continues to be a concern. I still think less about the government and more about communities. We've got to make sure that people understand what we do, how we do it, and what the impacts of that are. Because again, as I mentioned, politicians are going to be beholden to the people that vote for them, and if the people that vote for them don't want certain things, they're going to be reluctant to permit those things. So we need to make sure that we're working, very closely with the government and with local communities, special interest groups. Again, most local communities are fairly on side with what we do. They want jobs, they want a better quality of life. It's pretty straightforward stuff. oftentimes it's people from outside of those communities that come in and stir things up and want to make noise. So if there's a concern, my concern is just making sure that we don't get derailed by opposition and people that are opposed to mining and what we do. I do feel, I don't know for sure about within these small communities in the Dominican Republic, but I certainly feel as if over the course of the last year or so, there has been a bit of a paradigm shift with respect to how the world views mining and how the world views critical minerals and metals, and it's become a political topic of conversation lately that I think the idea of what we do has probably landed on a lot more people's screens than it would have, say, 10 years ago in terms of where this stuff comes from that we all use every day. So I think people are governments and people are becoming a little bit less opposed to the idea of mining and more interested in responsible mining and mining that is conducted in a way that's good for everybody, and we're more than happy to execute on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, at Ponton, you had some challenges before. How is that going, and what is that telling you about dealing with the other projects? Yeah,
we did have problems there. Some of those problems, not to point fingers at our former partner, but some of those problems emerged, I think, for two key reasons. Ponton is very closely located. It's close to Pueblo Viejo, Barrick's mine. Mm-hmm. Barrick at that time was discussing tailings expansion and that kind of thing, and so people were sort of opposing Barrick because they wanted to increase their mine. Not only were we close to that operation, but we had also just announced a joint venture or earn-in agreement with Barrick, so we were sort of perceived to be like an extension of Barrick, and so we had kind of this knee-jerk reaction from local people that, oh, you're Barrick or you're related to Barrick, and so we don't want you here. And we respected that. Look, the government at that time, again, to speak to the government's support, the government came in and said, hey, how can we help you? Do you want us to work with you with the local community? You are permitted and you're licensed, so if you need us to get rid of them or get them out of the way or bring in the military, I said, absolutely not. We don't want any of that kind of stuff. Let us just communicate with people, and if we'll gauge it, if it feels like it's not the right time, we'll remove ourselves, which is what we did. And as it turned out, we had other things to do, as we've talked about already, with other projects that we had lots of things to focus on and do. So we've not gone back there yet. We did recently do a bit of a sort of a community surveying, if you will, recently in and around the Ponton area. I think the noise is diminished a little bit. There's not as much opposition, but I think what we recognize is the work that's been done by GoldQuest and ourselves in and around Juan and Romero. Is not, you don't flick that on and off with a light switch. It's years of work that we've put in there. So we see the same thing at Ponton. If we want to go back to Ponton, I don't think we can just show up and say, hey, we're back. Is everybody okay with it? We would have to initiate that process, well in advance to be able to make sure that we take the time to sort of get people informed and educated and comfortable. So we still really like the targets there. As I said, we've had some people approach us about optioning assets, and Ponton would be the obvious one for most people. Would say, well, you're not doing anything over there. Can we option that from you? We still think there's a meaningful enough target or two there that we want to hang on to it, and when the time's right, I can see us putting some time and effort into community relations there as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the price of the stock might be becoming a bit of a risk here? Do you think it's getting ahead of itself maybe with the market and everything?
Yeah, it's hard to say. These things are, what's the fair value of something? It's difficult to say, right? It's what someone will pay for it. So in the last several weeks, people have been willing to pay what they've paid for shares of Precipitate that's significantly higher than what they would have paid, a month ago. I think given the fact that we don't have a resource and the fact that we have not yet initiated drilling, maybe it is getting a little bit ahead of itself, but I think it's built on speculation that at present, I have to assume the speculation is, well, these Dominican investors have invested in other things in this region that have done very, very well. And not that they've done well, but these investors have continued to support those investments with additional inflows of capital. So I think the market, looks at the trajectory of GoldQuest from 16 cents to 240 and looks at Precipitate even, from 11 cents to 50 and says, look, I still think there's room here. GoldQuest's gone up 1,000%, Precipitate's gone up 200, 300. Mm-hmm. So there's a few different ways to look at it. A slide I used to have in my PowerPoint presentation that I don't have presently was a 10-year chart of Gold Quest and a 10-year chart of Precipitate side by side. Now those two charts, of course, they were always priced higher than us, but relatively speaking, on a ratio basis, it's uncanny how closely they've traded with each other over the course of 10 years. And then in October of last year, or October of 2024, the Dominican investment into Gold Quest started this shift where the gap between Precipitate and Gold Quest increased, where they were up, like I say, 1,000%. We've sort of been lagging in that, and maybe on the back of this financing, people are seeing the opportunity to close that gap so that we would trade somewhere more along the lines of the historic ratio between Precipitate and Gold Quest. So based on that, I think that we've probably ticked up to a level that's probably a little bit more in line with where we've traded in relation to Gold Quest over the years. So so if I look at it that way, perhaps it's not incredibly overbought, and maybe more just it's been a little bit of a catch up here over the last few weeks.
If the price were to take a breather here, would insiders have the ability and willingness to be in the market on the bid and support a price?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to other insiders and what they do with their capital and with their money. I've put a fair bit of my own money into the company going back from day one. Not everybody knows this. I'm not a founder of Precipitate, so I came in after the company had already listed. The founders of the company wanted a change at the top, and so they approached me and asked me to come in. And at that time, the stock was 25 cents a share, and I said, look, I don't want to come in and just collect a paycheck, so I need to take a position. So I bought a couple of million shares at that time, right from day one, at a price that's now looks like it's a cheaper price, but for the last 7 years was far greater than where the stock had been trading. So I've got a fairly sizable position that I've paid real money for. It's not half-cent seed stock and 5 cent. It's my primary position was at north of 20 cents. So when I can, I've participated in most financings. Would I get in the market and buy? Sometimes yes, but the trick is I'm always aware of something that's going on with the company, so you have to be a little bit careful about perceived, insider information, and are you trading on it? And the other thing is I've never sold a share, and I've been with the company for 13 years, so I've got a wife and a child and a family, and there's only so much money that you can kind of lock away into your own deal, but I'm invested fairly heavily, and where there's opportunities, definitely would look to get back in.
So for years, the toughest person to pitch was your wife. You're like, yeah, I know it's 25 cents, but honey, I promise we're going to make money on this thing.
100%, yeah. Thankfully, she's understanding of it, but yeah, it's you put a lot of your equity and your sweat equity into your own deal, and so for me, the upside has always been my equity position. In terms of what I'm trying to accomplish here is to have a win for everybody that owns shares. So I'm happy to have as much stock as I can, but there's a threshold at which enough's enough sometimes.
I'm looking at the SEDI filings here, Jeff, and there seems to be a large seller as well in the open market, if I'm seeing that correctly. What's going on there? Yeah,
Strategic Metals, that's been an interesting one. So Strategic, put real money into the company going back many years ago. I want to say maybe 2016, something like that. The total investment was about $2 million cash that they put into Precipitate to acquire shares in a unit offering where they then exercise their warrants. Have been very, very loyal shareholders for a long time. I don't know this to necessarily be true, but it's kind of been expressed to me that they wanted to sort of top up their treasury as a public company themselves, and we're sort of looking at their investment world to see what they could liquidate to generate some capital. So they were doing some selling, and some of that I approached them about. This goes back to about October. And I approached them to ask them, look, are you, we're seeing it in the market. It appears to be that you're doing some selling. I'm seeing the SEDI filings. You are doing some selling. Can I help to facilitate that so we can sort of stop the slow bleed on this and just sort of cross some shares? So I was able to reach out to a handful of existing loyal shareholders who saw the opportunity to help me in cleaning that up. And so we did reposition some of that stock back in October. And I've talked to Strategic several times since then, as the share price has gone from sort of 10 cents to 15 to 20, and they've evidenced to me that they're done. So whether or not there's going to be more or not, I don't know. I mean, they're entitled to sell whenever they wish. But when I've spoken to them since that selling in October, they sort of said, that's the threshold we wanted to get to. We're happy to let the rest ride. And when I approached them, actually, they said, no, you know what, we think too much of your prospects to sell more at these prices, which is around 15 cents or something at that time. So again, everything's dynamic. They've got their own business to take care of, so they're entitled to sell whenever they wish. But I think right now they seem to be comfortable with what they have.
You do have the readiness, or you're prepared though to reach out to some people if they want to start selling again. You think you could place some of those shares?
Yeah, in fact, I have some shareholders right now who have asked me if I could shake some more stock out of hands like Strategic and some others. And I guess the good news is I'm having a hard time finding anybody that wants to sell me some shares. So yeah, it's a nice position to be in, where some significant shareholders now, whose probably average cost is closer to 10 or 11 cents, are interested in buying more as we're sitting here at sort of 40, 45 cents. But also those people who maybe paid 10 cents don't want to sell at 45. So it's a nice position to be in. Having said all of that, the market on Precipitate in the last few weeks has been a little perplexing to me because of what I just said. These guys want to buy, but these guys don't want to sell. But the stock has been trading 1.5 million, 2.5 million shares a day, almost every day for the last couple of weeks. So there's movement, I think that's good in that there's a little bit of cleaning house or whatever, but the demand seems to be there, and that's really what's driven the share prices. I think there's a lot of people who just didn't want to sell, and obviously people decided, hey, now's the time, and it's kind of pushed that share price up. But yeah, we've still got a number of very good loyal shareholders that are frequently touch base with me to ask if there's any stock available.
All right, Jeff. Well, not much of a weather to go and enjoy outside, but it is almost lunchtime, and I enjoy lunch in all sorts of weather. What am I forgetting to ask you here? Let's work toward wrapping it up. What else did you hope we talk about that I'm failing to bring up? Yeah,
I think we've touched on a lot of stuff. Obviously, the website is full of information. We try to keep that as up to date as we can, and so precipitategold.com. There's a lot of information there. Corporate presentation, news releases, information on the projects. And of course, our trading on both on the US, the OTCQB and the TSX Venture Exchange. So I'm an open book. I'm one of these guys, like I mentioned earlier about my IR background. If somebody emails or calls, they don't get someone else, they get me. And I'm more than happy to answer questions, take phone calls. If someone leaves a voicemail, I always call back. And whether somebody owns 1 share or 1 million shares, they're a shareholder of the company. That's important to me, and I'm happy to answer questions. And if there's things people don't understand or want to understand, I'm here to do that.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Maybe we do get Matt on, and then we talk about what's going on with the rocks in DR itself. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know, and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias, and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company-specific content
to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias, again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should under no circumstances be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. So unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you'll find the company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."